Fights for no one.
Okay, are we live? Or should I start? Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So welcome back.
Thank you.
Finally getting breakfast.
I hear you.
We are welcoming Ruth, Senator Hardy, to present her amendment to S 122.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Clarkson, and committee. It's lovely to be here. For the record, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District. And I have an amendment. I mostly wanted to have a conversation with y'all about S 122. And I sort of had that debate. Are you good, Rick?
Yep, good.
Had that debate with myself about whether I just, try to make the bill something better. In my view, obviously everything's subjective, or just, vote no like I did yesterday. But so this amendment deals with 3 topics. First is the film and arts council section. And that's first, second, and third, I believe, instances of amendment.
Section 3, Section B.
And what I was trying to do here is, as I mentioned on the floor, I have some personal knowledge about some people involved in film and media in Vermont. And I was trying to broaden this so it's not as specific to the sort of concept of a commercial film industry. Frankly, we are never going to be able to compete with the states and countries that are the entities that host and where people film major commercial films. We just are too small, and we don't have the personnel, we don't have the facilities, and it's not worth our money and time to
We don't
try
have
to
the
do.
money.
We don't have the
tax
money.
credits they
We
want.
just don't have but what we do have in Vermont is actually a really wonderful creative economy based on making
Right.
smaller film and media projects, small short films, documentaries, and we have really good film and media scholars and artists in the state. And I know these people personally, and I think that being able to have a broader perspective on film and media and who we're trying to help would be helpful. So what, attempting to get at this for the purposes of supporting the Vermont Film and Creative Media Industry Initiative, which will build the basic structure needed for Vermont's film and creative media sector for the purposes of supporting and growing the Vermont film and creative media community and industry, including academic, educational, creative, commercial, and exhibition resources. The other thing is we have several film festivals in Vermont. There's one, the International Film Festival here, I just saw flags up for it this morning.
It's beginning now.
Yeah, and there's another one in Middlebury. There's another one in
White River.
Burlington. There's
White
one.
River.
They're all over the state, and so those are part of our creative economy, but also our tourism economy, and just wanting to have those acknowledged. So exhibition resources. And then the database, I did talk to a few people who thought the database might be helpful. And I tried to expand it a little bit to include assets, opportunities, professionals, resources, and events. So you could call this person, what I heard mostly was that this position would be really helpful at the Arts Council. So that there would be somebody there who you could talk to if you're looking for, somebody who's an editor or somebody who's an actor or whatever they might know. So including that in the database, and that the part-time position to serve the point of contact for creators, exhibitionists, and industry professionals. So this was my attempt to expand that one a little bit more. I know the money was taken out, but that's that part of it. The next part is the Vermont Ireland Trade Commission, which overall I'm not a fan of this thing. As I mentioned to the chair in passing yesterday, somebody texted me yesterday to say,
Can we before I
Oh, yeah.
just want to make sure it's said, because I don't remember hearing this on the floor, but the one I'm fine, I think, with the amendment, but the one filmmaker witness we heard was a small documentary filmmaker on
Very small
women's skiing.
documentary.
On women skiing? Is that what
Yeah.
you said?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure, I just worried
So-
that somehow got lost in the discussion.
Yeah, it's always been for the entire range of the film and media and for ancillary businesses, which we do offer, sound, editing studios and graphic design.
That was the
Yeah.
intent.
Yeah.
The
And the
intent
way,
was that degree of breadth.
But
okay,
I think
And
this
without being
language,
specific, but just in case something got forgotten to ensure that we talk about the industry as a whole, but that.
yeah, I mean, the reason I brought this language up is because what I heard on the floor and what I've heard from others, and then of course the story from another senator was really about the sort of like Hollywood media in
No,
film
that was
industry.
never
That is
the intent.
never gonna be what we
That was
have.
never the
in Vermont,
intent,
ever.
but what was part of the intent was that we do have people who are working here in Vermont, who are working in the larger industry, and parts of it can in fact be done here. We also see, and I think I mentioned yesterday in the discussion, we have a lot of films that may be Hollywood film, portion of which involve Vermont, in which Vermont is either a background or a scenery or whatever.
Beetlejuice, and just recently.
Well, I wish I'd known, I could have gotten you dozens of witnesses on this topic.
And we had
did.
those as the witnesses at the
Yeah.
Film and Industry Festival.
Yeah,
The work that was done on the committee that came up with this.
right, no, I
the
realized
task
you
force,
all
we
did.
relied on the task force and
Yeah.
measure, and we have masses of witnesses on this, so.
Heard,
But I think this
I think
language
the
is
language
helpful.
just, and that what I heard from others was really focused on the Hollywood industry. That's not gonna be
No,
Vermont,
no,
but
it
what
was
we
never-
do have is a really great community that we should grow more and support more.
And when we eliminated the film commission, we did not really set up a robust alternative for, really, nurturing this industry and this sector. So we're doing it individually, in institution, to institution, but this is
Could
great.
probably get you 20 people to apply for this job, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the trade commission, as I said, I'm not a fan of this. Somebody texted me yesterday saying there are 31 state, Ireland trade commissions with 31 different states. So to the extent that anyone thinks that Vermont is special in this regard, no, it's an Irish senator who's coming over to try to get trade commissions with every state. So I think it's, I don't know, not a fan, but what I did, I mentioned on the floor that 10 seemed really big. So
So we see you carved.
I carved it down to 7, and saying that no more than 2 could be legislators. And it's the proportions are the same, 2 from the governor, the speaker, and the committee on committees. And then, that's, I think, all I did with that. Then there was a conforming change about the appointments. But then Senator Lyons mentioned on the floor this Commission on International Trade.
Right?
It is an existing commission. And it's kind of defunct. The last time it was it seems to have met was like 2019, maybe 2016. I don't know, it was a while ago.
Actually, quite a long time ago.
Yeah,
I
and
emailed Tim Kearney about it last night and
Yeah, you and the
was
chairs of the committees of jurisdiction are supposed to be co-chairs or
Yeah, I had
alternating
no idea
chairs or
someone to
something.
talk to me about it.
So I attempted, and Rick will tell you, he didn't have time to do the research to sort of see what the implications of what this amendment would do. So, he is not at fault. I asked him to put this in here. Right now, this commission focuses on international trade agreements that are between the federal government and the United States. And then the commission is supposed to talk about how that impacts Vermont. So what this amendment would do is change it so that it's both federal and foreign country and Vermont and foreign country. So it expanded if we're doing our own thing with Ireland or Canada or whomever, this commission on international trade could look at it. And it expands the powers to include on the back of page 4, the commission shall be consulted when a trade commission is proposed to be established by the General Assembly and shall provide a recommendation as to whether the Trade Commission shall be established. So that there's some other entity besides just the legislature that's looking at, hey, is the Ireland thing something we should do? Or maybe we should pursue something with Canada first, since they're our major trading partner. I do not understand why we would start with Ireland and not start with Canada. But the other thing
Well,
that,
in all fairness, we have started with Canada. We have established a trade office and a consultancy in Canada, which has reaped
Yeah,
benefits. So
but we don't have the same kind of
We don't.
like thing. But I just want to mention that I looked at the duties of this International Trade Commission, and actually it might be a really good time to revive it, because one of the things it's supposed to do is provide a mechanism for citizens and legislators to voice their concerns, which it shall use to make policy recommendations to the General Assembly, to the governor, to Vermont's congressional delegations, or to the trade representatives in the United States government. Recommendations shall be designed to protect Vermont's job and business environment and state sovereignty from any negative impact of trade agreements. Like, this seems like the perfect time to be like, hey, we have this commission,
exactly.
we hate these tariffs, and that we're going to talk about it in this and issue recommendations. So I thought reviving it might be helpful.
I think that's a great idea, and I'm very grateful to you. Tim Tierney says, so if the ITC strengthens and grows these relationships, it's a good thing. Supportive. Ireland has many reasons and similarities to Vermont to become a major trade culture partner. It's also an opportunity for commission boards, the ITC, in addition to learn about trade efforts and resources and diplomacy needed to other parts of the world as well to be effective.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I think strengthening the ITC is a great idea, and
That's this commission.
the International Trade Commission. Well, there's
Is it-
also
is
the
it-
Ireland. You're
it
right. They're
doesn't-
both ITC.
Yes, exactly. So I think the Ireland, you've got the cart before the horse in this bill. The Trade Commission, the International Trade Commission, I think should be revived first, and then you decide whether you want to do the Ireland thing, but there's something better to do. But whatever, I was trying to work within the parameters I had, and I thought reviving that, I thought Senator Lyons had a
I
good
think she
point
had a
yesterday.
terrific.
And so that's what this amendment attempts to do, is revive that and maybe get it going again, especially given everything that's happening right now. International trade. So,
Conversation. We have our public assets partners here. We may need 5 more minutes. This is an amendment to our of the bill that we have on the floor this afternoon.
yeah, so, this was my attempt to make the bill a little
Thank
better.
you. And may I ask if we accept this amendment, will you vote for the bill?
Well, that's sort of part of the game, isn't it? And that.
No, it's just a question.
I would vote for the bill. That's why I hesitated as doing this amendment, because I have other concerns with the bill more
I
broadly,
know.
but just in the spirit of trying to make a bill, even if one that I don't like, making it a little better. That's why I brought the amendment.
And we appreciate that. Okay, so you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I find all of these friendly. So I'll start by saying that I definitely hear your concerns. We have a long discussion about what's the right way to structure a trade commission. What do we have that's existing? I used to manage Burlington's sister city, so I
Yeah.
hear you from like a ops perspective, partner states, sister cities, states, regions, provinces.
are good.
Yeah. It's all good. And one of the things that I thought would be valuable about this trade commission is that it almost makes more transparent the otherwise the junkets that we're invited on, that we all make very personalized decisions around, are they paying for my hotels? Who is paying for it? Is it, I want my constituents to know that I gave this some thought. I mean, I was saying a legislator, I remember went to Azerbaijan on a trip paid for by them. And I thought that was ill-advised, but people are kind of left on their own to make those decisions. And this could end up being more transparent, given that the treasurer is accounting for the funds and that's searchable. So I don't think the conversation's over. I think we all want to look at how we strengthen our trade partnerships and make them more transparent. And, you know, I know legislators who went with the Guard. I don't know what was disclosed or not. I think, you know, I've had constituents say, like, let's go look at Canada's healthcare system because it's broken. You know, I used to have some of those folks in my district, and I was like, great, I'll go with you to Canada to look at your healthcare system. You know, I just think, I think we should formalize this, and I think what you've done helps us do that. And I also just want to say for the record, I am trying to ask a lot of businesses how the tariffs are impacting them. And overall, it's, you know, obviously dampening our person-to-person relationships and our country-to-country relationships. It helps to understand that certain industries might get a larger share of a particular market if their domestic interests are protected. You know, so I think it's incumbent upon us as legislators to know both the good and the bad of tariffs. And, you know, just want to say that because I don't like that it's the way it's framed and how broad they are. Tariffs should really generally be very specific, and these are way too broad. But it's good for us to have trade commissions and infrastructure to understand all of the costs and benefits of tariffs.
Let me ask just one
Yeah,
question regarding your amendments. And I think we mentioned this on the floor yesterday, a question about the number of legislators who are serving on it. No more than 2 members serving and being members of the General Assembly. But what if there are people in the General Assembly who have specific qualifications that are relevant to this? Why would you look at that?
Well, I think that sometimes when we create these kinds of, and for better and worse, because I don't think it's always fair, but it's sometimes when we create these kinds of commissions, it just seems like yet another committee that legislators can be on. And particularly because this one, to me, seems like it could lead to more junkets. It seemed problematic. And so I think limiting the number of legislators is helpful. I just think also 10 people is way too many.
Maybe
So that's why,
a number, and I understand that.
that's why I limited it.
I'm just concerned about the rationale by limiting the governor's choices, or for that matter, the committee on committee's choices.
No, I think they're all equal, which we are equal branches of government and has equal appointees. So
Yeah, I mean, they're all still equal at 2 each, but
the
the
issue
number-
of the
legislator,
one of the someone brought up, I don't remember who it was on the floor yesterday, that, you know, the governor's appointee could be a legislator.
yes,
yes, I suppose that's true. I just got the feeling with this that there were a lot of legislators who were interested in this, and this could be completely wrong, because they were psyched to go to Ireland. And there are legislators on this other commission that already exists. There are plenty of opportunities for legislators to be on things.
yes.
So,
And I would just point out that the biggest junket we actually have at the moment is the trip to Taiwan. And there's no trade commission, which I in many ways wish there was in Taiwan.
great, why didn't we start with Taiwan?
And that's, well, I think we're starting where we're starting. And I think the notion of reviving our Commission on International Trade is a great one.
That is,
And I am really grateful to you, Jenny, for doing that. And I would accept a motion to accept this amendment and vote on it favorably.
So move. I'm not very pro junket, by the way.
You're pro
Transparent junket.
I'm pro transparent junkets, and as people know, transparently, we are given $1,000 to participate in continuing education and legislators to go to conferences and to go on this kind of a trip.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with going on a
You learn
trip
things.
where you learn things, where you grow your ability to be a good legislator, all of that. I just think it's really important that, especially for something like this, we're careful about the optics of it. And for me, the optics made me uncomfortable, and if it's making me internally uncomfortable, I think it could make people extra uncomfortable.
So thank you.
Yeah,
All those, and as well, all those who support this.
Let you just ask one question.
Yeah, sorry.
The part-time position on the Vermont Arts Council, is that the only way to solve this from your perspective?
well, the part-time position was in your.
It's in our bill.
Yeah, it was in your bill, so I'm not adding it. It's in the bill originally.
It's part
I
of
think
What are you changing?
what I'm changing is just sort of broadening the scope of what this position and this database would be doing. And I did, in talking to my my film and media source, which, full disclosure, I will say, is my husband, who's film and media professor at Middlebury College. He said that this position would be really helpful to people in the community and industry, because then there would be a point of contact at the Arts Council that they could talk to and be like, hey, I need an editor. Do you, who do you know?
Who do you have?
Yeah, so I'm not adding it, it's in there, but I also think appropriations took it out anyway.
It doesn't mean it can't be added back.
So I was wondering if you would entertain the page 2, line 2, changing the word exhibitionists to like exhibitioners.
Yeah,
Something to that
I
effect?
was trying to figure out what the right word was, because exhibitionist sounds a little weird. I totally agree, but Rick, do you know what the right?
Exhibitioners.
Exhibitioners?
Exactly.
Creative exhibitionists might.
Fair.
get a whole-
So if you want to, could you make that change? Rick?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
So
happy
we can
to-
grab 1.3.
I found a typo too.
Okay. Perfect. We will
Thank you,
fix the
David.
typo and
Yeah, I'm good with
I appreciate.
I can see
that.
cabaret skit around the exhibitionist for you and the creative economy.
Okay,
Okay.
Dave and I will do that.
A straw poll. All those in favor of supporting this amendment on the floor? Right,
Thank
5-0.
you. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time today.
Productive
See you
partnership.
later. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you, Senator.
very appreciated.
Thanks, be productive with our next bill too.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
hours a day.
Take care.
Thank you. You too. So we welcome. Thank you, Rick. We will see you at 11
Ish.
ish.
Yes.
Okay, ish. So Julie, we welcome you.
You have a copy. Do you not want me to green chair? What's your preference here?
Depends on how you would like to proceed.
And
It's
I'm
entirely
more
up to you.
chair.
Yeah.
Green chair always helps those who are watching.
Yeah. Oh, good.
House.
Thank you. I got it.
You're now go up.
Right, all right, here are 2 of those.
Julie Lowell, I think this may be your first time in our committee this year.
Yes, definitely.
And as we table set, for the post crossover period, we had wanted to have you in earlier, earlier in the session, but we ran short of time, which the Senate often sadly does. And so we thought this report was really good and really helped us as we look at our work post crossover, and we welcome you. But let's introduce ourselves first.
Fellow South Burlingtonian, it's good to see you, Julie.
You need to. Tom, you help me. Try. Four.
So I don't know.
How did you know that
It's your
special?
microphone.
Know that?
Your speaker well, too. So if you would like to meet with him, just mute it.
Oh,
And then
thank you.
feedback in. So
Yeah, always helpful that.
I can always do it when someone's not watching.
I still want to turn your microphone.
No, it's fine.
Both.
I think it,
And then soon over here.
Yeah.
I think there's a window open, so you want to close that settings window. And then there you go.
Very better.
Now you.
So
thank you, Julie.
you're like, when I used to substitute teach, I would always find the kid that was like, and be like, you just sit
So,
there.
Tom Shipman, and
Well, this is neither here nor there, but Julie's sister delivered both of my kids.
wow, very cool.
So I do know Julie.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor District.
Randy Franklin.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Loveland Council.
Thank you.
And
Nice to be here.
introduce yourself and take
Yes.
it away.
Thank you for having me. For the record, I'm Julie Lowell. I'm the Economic Security Policy and Outreach Director at Public Assets Institute. And before I go much further, I'm going to share my screen for those following along.
And while you're doing that, Stephanie, you want to introduce, it's not,
Yeah,
It is.
yeah,
you want to introduce yourself as well, just because we have.
yeah, I'm happy to provide backup to Julie as needed, but she won't need it. Steph Yu, Executive Director of Public Assets.
Get that bigger. What is the font size view? Okay, tech issues solved. Thank you for your patience. So Public Assets is a nonprofit in Vermont that works on state fiscal policy to improve the well-being of all Vermonters and to advance racial and economic equity. We do a lot of research, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. But before I jump into our findings, much of which are from our State of Working Vermont report that we produce annually, and that came out in January of this year, I just want to do a little ground study to really think about state statutes. And with everything happening federally right now, I think it's more important than ever that we understand the state and purpose of our current system, where it does well in supporting people and where we need improvement. So in 2012, Vermont passed the People's Budget Language, which called for our state revenue and spending policies to address. It's a bit of a list, but I'm going to say them all because I think they're all really important, right? Our state revenue and spending policies should be addressing health, housing, dignified work, education, food, social security, and a healthy environment. And as we face the squeeze that's no doubt coming with the federal cuts, I think it's really important that we consider our funding sources now and how we can strengthen those so that we can fund critical basic needs that we know all Vermonters need, that we're not already making them our fund, and that are going to become more difficult in the next few years. So as you'll see from the data that I'm going to share, much of which comes, as I said, from State of Working, we're doing better in some of the target areas than others. But we know that through the right policies and state investments that provide cash assistance, strong public goods that support wealth or asset building and that create equitable economies, that we can really take concrete steps to bring us closer to the state promises so that everyone in the state has economic security and that people can not just make ends meet, but ends meet. And so to ensure that people can make ends meet, their incomes need to be their expenses. And we have found that for far too many Vermonters, this isn't the case. So each year, I think you're all very familiar with the Joint Fiscal Office and States Committee's budget. And so their report also came out in January, and it showed that for a family of four with just one earner, they're about, that family needs nearly $90,000 to make ends meet. So our our minimum wage, our wage floor in Vermont is over $50,000 short of that mark.
Yeah.
And then that mark also is much higher than the poverty level, which is often talked about. So we've taken this number, but we haven't yet evaluated the 2025 report. We're working on it. It's not finished yet. But last year we used the 2023 report, and we looked at how Vermont was doing based on this benchmark. So we took census data and we married it with these benchmarks. And what we found, these are the percentages of families within each of Joint Fiscal Office's categories that are making ends meet. And so what you can see is that all the families are struggling, in particular, if there's a family with a single adult, over 50% of those households are failing to meet their basic needs. So the high number of Vermonters not meeting their basic needs, this is a wage problem and a cost problem. So historically, Vermont's wages, they have been much lower than the national average. And so you can see that on this chart here, as well as compared to New England states. While generally our prices are average, so that green line there is kind of the indexed benchmark of what's happening nationally.
So Julie, this committee's always, for the last 9 years I've been on it, has always sort of been told that we lag about 20%, but Vermont underpays about 20%.
With our wages.
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting because we've tried to dig into this number a little bit more because this is the average. And so what we found was that wages for many jobs in Vermont are lower than for the same job in other states. So depending on which data source, this is looking at the average wage, but depending on which of the data sources on wages you look at, So generally we pay lower for the same jobs compared with other states, but also we know that there's very high paid workers in just a handful of states that really pull up that national average. So that actually most states fall below that green line you're seeing on the screen. However, in those states, the gap between prices and wages is often smaller than what we see in Vermont. Okay. So even as wages are too low to cover costs, we have seen them rising. And so over the last 20 years, we actually saw wages on the low end growing the fastest over the last 20 years. But as you can see that even though that's a higher percentage of growth, the level of growth is going to be less for that 10th percentile because they're at such a low level. And some of the growth is due to a demand for workers. From July of 21 to July of 24, Vermont had more than 2 job openings for every person looking for work, as you can see here. Unfortunately, with these job opening numbers, there isn't data to tell us what pay those jobs these are. So what levels of pay are, the number of hours, where they're located, or sort of, what types of qualifications people need to fill these jobs. So gonna go one last point on wages is that our minimum wage was once one of the highest in New England. It has now lost ground and it continues to pull away from Vermont's livable wage. So this livable wage is defined as the wage single person in shared housing needs to earn working full-time to make ends meet. So in 2024, Vermont's minimum wage was nearly $5 lower compared to the Vermont livable wage. Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
so you kind of jumped the terms of it. So you were talking about basic needs. Now you're talking about
Livable wage.
livable wage. So what's the?
Yeah, so it's good, great question. Yeah, so the basic needs budget provides 6 family types. And so there's a different, for each of those family types, there's a different wage that they need to make. The state has defined the livable wage as the wage a single person in shared housing needs to work full time. So they specifically tie it to one earner.
One of those 6.
Yeah, and then we did, as you may remember, when we had Patrick present the basic needs budget early on in session. Because remember, we were beginning to address my bill, which does equate, pulls the livable wage, the minimum wage up to the livable wage. We had in our task force 2 summers ago, we now calculate the rural livable wage and the urban livable wage. And for this bill, we did an average of the 2, but we now have 1 category, but 2 pegged livable wages.
And now I believe we did use the average for this chart, but I can verify that if you're curious. Yeah.
But you're using all our other new stuff from from the summer.
Yeah.
24.
Yes. Yeah. And so
what you're showing here is that our minimum wage is now lower than Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine.
Yeah.
and lowest in New England if you discount New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is still tied to the US.
Okay.
Mhm.
And our livable wage, I think what's important here is to look at the difference between the livable wage and the gap there.
Yeah.
In here.
So in 2025, we're now at 1401. It's about a $10,000 annual gap if you think about a worker working full time at the minimum wage.
Yeah. For the record, I tried to propose last year that we bring people paid by the state up to the livable wage. And that didn't even get through. So
Well,
that's
we're gonna
still
have-
where I am.
Yeah.
So we're not hypocritical asking other people to do this.
No, and that is why we've drafted the bill, but many of you signed up to it. I think it's S37, but I may be wrong. And we're gonna, so please continue.
So
Sorry.
that's no problem. That's kind of the wage side of things. I'm going to jump into the price side of things. And so,
That's 67.
Thank you. S67.
I'm going to specifically talk about healthcare, housing, and food. Those continue to drive the increasing prices in Vermont. And housing is the #1 household expense for most households. Food is generally the second highest expense, depending on the family type. So in terms of healthcare, what I have for you is an inflation index for each of these 3 areas we're going to talk about. These are only available at the level of New England. We don't have state-specific numbers on these. But what you can see is that in that 12-month period ending in October 24, medical costs were above 6%, right? And much higher than inflation overall. The impact of that is that this chart in particular looks at out-of-pocket healthcare costs specifically for those who have employer coverage. And it doubled for many Vermonters over a 10-year span. So we're hearing a lot about healthcare. Here's some of the numbers of what people are experiencing. The good news has always been in Vermont that over 95% of Vermonters have health insurance coverage, but I wanted to sort of try to begin to drop in what we're expecting federally. And so of those 95% of Vermonters who have health insurance coverage, based that's a 2023 number, we know about 140,000 of them have Medicaid coverage. We don't know yet how the federal cuts are going to impact each individuals, but based on what we've seen so far in the federal budget process, and analysis by the Kaiser Family Foundation, it's expected that over a third of those 140,000 Vermonters risk losing some of their benefit this summer. This will impact their health, their household budgets, and of course, it's going to have downstream effects on our overall healthcare system. Housing costs, it's not uplifting, but it's important to be talking about.
Oh, absolutely. It's, yeah, we talked about this yesterday in chair committee. Because we're trying to be thoughtful in anticipating the federal cuts and the Medicaid cuts alone, which is
They're very
huge holes in our budget.
But I guess I'm trying to make sure I understand, unless I missed something. Employer-based healthcare, these are the figures for employer-based.
They are the employer, yes.
So are we seeing that those who were in the exchange or had otherwise subsidized or non-employer based healthcare did better in that context?
It's a good question. I think we can see from the inflation numbers that the costs are going up either way. And so I couldn't speak on that specific point.
Okay.
This is the methodology that we took that Joint Custodian Office uses around how they assess healthcare costs. Nolan would be an excellent resource on this.
One is a whiz and he's our secret weapon.
Yes, he's amazing. So in terms of housing, you can see that if you're looking at the cost of renting or home ownership, that inflation has continued to inflation in those two areas, housing has continued to outpace inflation overall. And what that has meant is that over 50% of households with incomes under $75,000 paid more than 30% of their household income on housing. And again, this is 2023 numbers. This is the most recent data we have available.
Can we go back to the last slide?
Yes.
So this is 21 to 24.
So housing costs, is that encompassing property taxes? Like what is included in a housing cost, just rent or your mortgage?
Yeah, so rent is your housing cost, it's your rent and I believe it's your utilities. Housing costs, I don't believe that covers taxes. Stuff, do you know on that one? I think it includes all. I think it's taxes, mortgage payment, all of the above.
Okay. My job, at least I'll speak for myself, is to be extremely specific about which cost drivers are impacting which households. So, we know housing costs are rising. I think anything more granular is where it becomes more helpful to us to have a real policy discussion. And for example, I recently wrote an article for our local news highlighting that people are feeling the property tax impact because the value of their own home went up astronomically. So unless we are giving people, I think, real specific granular information to understand why their costs are going up, it's just not that helpful.
You have a chart with the monthly
Can we
payment
go to
breakdown?
like granular charts maybe?
Well, or maybe have you back with more detail, but this is
Yes.
I think we know
a starting point.
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
and I think trying to digest for people what's actually happening in their communities becomes where we really need to focus.
Yeah.
If I could add something.
Yeah.
I was
A little louder stuff.
sorry, if I could add something, we did do a monthly payment breakdown.
Okay.
On one page, and Julie might have it, but what it showed was that most of the increase in the monthly payment was actually interest. It's the interest rate that is a
Yeah.
big issue with
Great.
your
Yeah.
mortgage payment. So we have that in the report. So if you look at the full report, you can see that breakdown in a
Right.
little more detail.
That's really helpful. So for the homeowners, it's the interest payments, and for renters, obviously, a lot of that is being rolled into the cost.
There you go. There we go.
Yeah.
It's the interest double.
Yeah, that,
Thank you.
that's
Sorry, I was
Yeah,
trying to pick
no,
and
no, no.
choose how much
Yeah.
I shared, so
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I didn't want to read the whole. report.
Julie, would you be kind enough after this to send this?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's in the whole report, and I believe the whole report is on our website under our documents and resources.
Yeah.
Or it should be.
Yeah, and you know, one of the
Believe that.
points that when I did this for,
Mhm.
general really made was that the interest piece here,
Mhm.
at that end of the first year, not only have you paid that much more for the median price of housing,
Yeah,
you don't have that equity built up in your house.
Right.
So much more is going into interest, and I don't have that number off the top of my head, but
so this deeply impacts anyone who's purchasing
yes.
a
Yeah.
home or anyone who has a floating mortgage rate.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those of us lucky enough to have a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Have won
that
the
was
lottery.
that, yeah, what I really,
Everybody
really
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like the.
So this is, thank you. Why don't you
Yeah.
keep going? Because we, at 11, we have to
Yep,
sadly
okay.
pivot to another bill.
So over 74,000 households with lower median income are underwater. They're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. We know this is driven by a lack of affordable units in Vermont. It seems like from the distribution of units that we are losing some of our lower priced units overall. Of course, as rental costs continue to get breached, our housing has increased over 3.5 times. We don't have this January 25 data yet, but we know it's likely not to have improved. We also have seen so far federally that the continuing resolution that just passed at the federal level, it provided level funding for federal programs. And so essentially that was a cut of 32,000 vouchers nationally. To put that in context, we have about 7,400 vouchers in Vermont. We don't know how many of those households are going to be impacted yet, but some number of them certainly will be. And there was a freeze in Burlington at one point, and it's, I think, like so much of the news, everything's changing so rapidly. I don't have an update for you on that right now. In terms of food costs, we really saw the cost of food skyrocket in 22. The good news is that's gone down, the growth has gone down. Of course, the prices haven't, right? So people are still facing those increased prices from 22, even while the cost of food has begun to grow more slowly. At the same time, government assistance.
Sorry, I just to go back to food. This does not, I don't think this reflects what I'm hearing at all, or what I'm seeing in the supermarket. It's only steadily rising. And so I'm stunned that you have the big spike here in 2022.
We have balanced.
Anyone who's buying eggs, that
Well,
spike
eggs
is
in
going way
particular,
up.
and it's interesting that you say that because this is from October and these numbers come out monthly. I mean, we should try to update them because I think, yes.
This week, my freeloading chickens finally started delivering eggs. I'm very happy about that.
Reloading chicken.
We all maybe need to start keeping chickens.
I think that's right.
But I mean, it's not just eggs. I mean, it's, I mean, I sort of vaguely monitor 3 or 4 things. For, as we all must be, but as we read about this and look at it. And, I'm not going to share the 3 or 4 things. Eggs is one of them. But there is nothing that has gone down. So I cannot account for this little low, almost 0% food in October 24.
Well, I think again, it's like so many things went up that they didn't come down. It's just they're not going up at that same rate.
Oh, I see. So
Okay, yeah, this is
Right.
so
a
in some ways, it would be fairer to show.
it's a leveling off.
It's a,
Yeah, so my butter, it's 546. I love
Yeah.
the bake. It's still
butter's one of them.
still
Butter
546, right? It's not, but we're not seeing them fall back down.
Correct.
So people
But they're
still,
building on that high.
they're building up a high, exactly. Yeah, this is the rate of growth. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's an important point.
Yeah, because that doesn't, you look at that and you think, oh, prices have gone down.
No,
No, they haven't.
no, people are still experiencing those increased prices. Hopefully they will start rising less slowly. They have been. But at the same time, we saw that food assistance actually came down at the federal level, right? SNAP benefits had increased during the pandemic, they came back down, and now per person, people are getting an average of about $160 per month on SNAP benefits compared to over $250 in 2022. So just again, to make that point, prices have not come down, assistance has fallen. And that impacts more than 10% of Vermonters. 66,000 Vermonters receive food stamp or 3 squares per
So
month.
more than 10%.
Yeah, it's over 66,000. So without some state intervention, we are bracing for the
66,000
Vermonters,
Vermonters,
Vermont
individuals.
individuals, because it's based on
Mhm.
individual benefit, right?
Yeah.
of adults. That's still more than
Mhm.
1%.
We're 660.
We're 648,000.
Right, I just didn't know if that includes kids, because if you
It does,
subtract kids, okay.
Oh, no,
you
no,
know,
no, this is individuals. Mhm.
Individuals including kids.
Including children, yeah. So we're bracing for the need for more food support. We know that this is another thing that will likely be getting cut this summer, impacting those 66,000 Vermonters and 700 authorized retailers in the state. Don't know how much you've heard about this right now or how many details you want, but some of the things that we're worried about, that they're going to be rolling the thrifty food plan back, that they might cut eligibility, that they'll expand work requirements, and that they might ask states to take up shifting costs to the benefit.
Well, the first one we've heard about is, of course, universal meals. Right, in schools where many
Yes.
of our families,
Yes.
those kids get
Huge.
at least 2 meals a day that they can count on.
Yeah, if you have a breakdown of
Yeah, this,
the demographics, particularly age, like seniors and kids who rely on food assistance. So
it would be
Not
great.
coming now, but it's something that can fall.
And I would encourage you also to, in case you haven't presented this in health and welfare, to be presenting it there as well. And I'll speak to Jimmy about that, but share with her.
All right, so that is most of my bad news. So
How are we improving?
how are we improving? Let me show you some of the things that we've done well, and I'll try to be.
but also
brief.
like car insurance. I mean, a lot of types of insurance are now becoming out of reach for people.
Yes. I don't know if that's
Flood
something you're
insurance,
tracking. Yeah.
increasingly, we have to look at, and that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to have our property and casualty insurance folks in to explain why people are paying so much more, but they are still nearly insolvent and restricting access to new customers. Because we should at least understand that.
Sure, let's make sure we. Okay, let's,
So targeted government investment can provide adequate support. So what we saw during the pandemic is that the newly expanded federal child tax credit, as well as the state child tax credit, it did cut child poverty. And so what you're looking at is the official poverty measure, which shows this is based on income compared to a fixed need threshold. And the light orange line is the supplemental poverty measure. And this includes tax credits, it includes food benefits that people are receiving. So you can really see with this the impact of these important programs, as 3,000 fewer people were living in poverty during this time period because of these benefits. For working Vermonters, the state earned income tax credit is a really important policy program. So this shows the amount of the state credits. The income is on the bottom and the amount of the state credits on the side for a few sample tax filing families. And so we know that even with an adequate wage floor, an employer can't necessarily pay more to accommodate an increasing family size. And this is exactly what the EITC provides up to an extent. So the more children workers with low and moderate incomes have, the more they receive with this refundable tax credit. It's a program that works really well. There are proposals on the House side that would improve this program, really helping Vermonters. Specifically, it's targeted at the smallest trapezoid, those single workers without children, who, as you can see, don't get a very large benefit. The proposal would increase this tax credit up to almost $400 more. So more can be done using these refundable tax credits to support families. They have really provide families flexible cash assistance to meet their needs. They don't impact other benefits. So it's a really good policy tool. And then finally, I don't have a chart for this, but I just want to point out the progress with childcare. We committed over $100 million annually, as you all know, and we're already seeing the impacts of it in the Joint Fiscal Office's Basic Needs Budget report. For the first time, we saw that the basic needs budget increased for some of these families. So This is how we can make life more affordable for folks. So investments in other public goods like housing and healthcare also can make life more affordable for Vermonters. Given the reality of how many people aren't meeting their basic needs and what is coming, we know that there's more impacts coming this summer. Now is the time that we approach our budget differently, thinking about how do we raise revenue to meet the obligations that we've committed to in the people's budget.
So you have
language.
two members of the finance committee here.
So I touched around the concerns of Medicaid, SNAP, and housing. We're expecting, there's already also been impacts of federal funding freezes and then unfreezing, uncertainty about how these different grants are going to play out for people moving forward. And of course, how businesses and consumers, as we were just talking about, are going to be impacted by the tariffs.
We're having, and if you have any suggestions or input, we're having a joint hearing between the House Commerce and our committee on April 9th to address the Canada-US trade and tariff situation. We have a 3-hour joint hearing, and we just put that together yesterday. We'll share that today. And if you have any people, sort of your counterparts in Canada, or we would appreciate hearing if you have a witnesses and you think what do you think.
Let me bring that to the team.
Yeah, David.
So it's a good presentation, it's good data, I appreciate it, especially where you summarize the facts and what have you. But to your comment about how do we raise revenue, does your group look at how do we maybe utilize programs differently? Instead of just pulling a lever to increase revenue, are we looking at is your organization looking at programs which could be maybe contracted a little bit to allow expansion in one of the other programs that you highlighted?
No, that's a great question. I think at this point, what we've really looked at is how people are meeting their basic needs and recognizing that they're not.
I get that.
Yeah, I think, we have over the years, I think we've considered it and have found that our big focus is that we do have so many unmet costs in the state that we need more. And what we're seeing with the proposed tax cuts is that there is going to be quite a lot of savings for the highest income earners in Vermont, up to the tune of about $50,000 per taxpayer, the richest 1%. And so we do think that there are opportunities to expand some revenues. This will be the impact of the federal, the likely impact of the federal tax cuts.
Why don't you finish? Because in 5 minutes, we have to sadly pivot.
So the tax cuts we believe are coming will go to the top 20% of taxpayers, about 69% of it, about 500 times that of the bottom fifth. And this is sort of on top of tax cuts that went into effect in 2017. So not in addition to, but just knowing that those cuts have been in place since 2017. So there's quite a lot of revenue, there's quite a lot of income in the state that has not been tapped. So we have an opportunity to strengthen our system.
Do you have a way to compare this to Biden tax cuts?
Let me look.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a little bit of digging.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, just last kind of putting this in a different perspective of what this means for an individual. The top 1% has over $1 million to cover their expenses once their basic needs have been met, and at the bottom end, we know that the bottom 80%, the good portion of the bottom 80% are struggling to meet their basic needs.
So this is a Vermont specific.
This is Vermont specific, as is the other one.
Okay.
Yeah, most of it is Vermont specific.
Yes, as much as.
Well, I just want to make sure.
Aside from inflation.
Mhm.
So what is shocking here is that the big, to working adults, $100,000 is really.
It's a hard mark for a lot of families to meet. Yeah. So there's a lot. I will share the full report so that you have the chart.
I believe we
did
have it on our website.
Oh, great.
Go behind.
I have the report that you sent me in January.
Yeah.
Okay. There are pieces on demographics there, my
And
reach in
is there an
there.
update to that? That's the latest, right?
That is the
January.
latest, yep. And so, happy to, I know we're running out of time, but happy to answer questions about any of those.
And so we've had this discussion before, and I just think it's good practice that, finance might usually do to dig in more with JFO. But it's good practice to recognize that, the average income at the top levels, really in all of them, but particularly at the top levels, might be a one-time income event or a once in a decade income event. And so I just, when we talk about the average income or the top income earners, I feel it's my responsibility to have that conversation with my constituents that over half of the people that are captured in the tax bill that came forward last year were having a non-annual income event.
And is there a way for you to parse that data so that we could differentiate for finance committee and ways and means? What is a
I'm gonna
one-time
turn
event?
to step on that, because I think Jack's done some
Sure,
research on the one-time event.
Sorry, and actually,
Selling her house.
so
Five.
why am I forgetting her name? Who left JFO?
Emily?
No, who used to do all our paid leave.
Joyce Manchester.
Joyce.
Joyce Mann.
Joyce Manchester, who we met.
Joyce
Yeah.
finally fully retired,
She did, so,
which we do miss her.
just like Deb Brighton.
So, Senator Weeks, I can dig up her presentation of finance from last year. But,
Sure.
so first of all, she might point out who this impacts, and it's more often seniors. And I don't remember exactly what her charts showed particularly, but a one-time or a non-annual income event would be something like taking your retirement or selling a house or selling a business. So selling a house, obviously you have to do in the state, and that's probably the people who most need that income to live on or to pass something on to their kids. It's their generational wealth is selling their house or passing on their house. If you are selling a business, you probably you have probably tax advisors who are encouraging you to look at changing your residency if that is going to give you significantly more of the income from selling that business.
So, tax has that information because they divide income, tax by income. So versus an event or a sale they're different. I assume tax department.
I don't know how granular we've asked.
Tax department able to differentiate? Yes. Yeah, sure. Our secret weapon here who used to do this with JFO. And so
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up, because I know that.
that would be helpful.
I believe
And I think
we've done
helpful for
some
finance.
Well,
research.
this also creates some of the distortions that you have when trying to decide where income actually is being received and what providers are getting large amounts of income. In many cases, that income has been shifted before their departure from the state. It doesn't appear here. Similarly, for people who move to the state to retire, for example, they may have achieved large amounts of wealth someplace else that's been taxed there that doesn't appear here. So there are distortions happening. And one of the
Yeah, because and then we're
that
gonna
is,
shift.
in terms of the report that you've given and some of the perspectives associated with it, that represents the point of view of Public Assets Institute. Do you have any competition, if you will, who would look at the same information and perhaps come to different conclusions?
Whether that's the revenue pieces or or kind of the basic needs.
Well,
Or
the
price.
basic needs
the
are
policy
obviously one, it's the policy pieces,
Yeah.
or for that matter, in terms of when you aggregate statistics and display them in a certain way, as you know, with perspectives, you can present it in different
Absolutely.
ways, and indeed, in some cases, come to different conclusions. And so I'm really kind of asking, do you have any competitors in analyzing Vermont data that you could point to?
I think the chamber does a lot of analysis. I think the Vermont Futures Project does a lot of analysis. Restraint Fiscal Office and the Tax Department, the administrative offices, those are the ones I'm most familiar with. The Allen Institute,
I mean,
believe,
right
is
now,
not
the Ethan Allen
doing
Institute
much work.
is essentially non-operative, and they were the one place, and there are national organizations like the Tax Foundation, for example, that looks time to time at some Vermont data and
Yeah.
comes to different conclusions. So
And I think that's a great point. too.
Steph
There's a lot of
has a contribution, and then I think we're going to,
Just really briefly, I mean, I agree. Like, I think a lot of times you can look at the same data and come to different conclusions. What we try to do though is make sure that the data analysis is as fact checked, as thorough as possible. So what we used to work with the Ethan Allen Institute and always sort of agree that this is what's true about the data. I think we would agree with you that people might come to different conclusions about what the policy prescriptions are, but we try to make sure that our analysis is impeccable and looking at all the facts, looking at the data available and fact check thoroughly so that what you're seeing is the reality of how many families can meet their basic needs, but whether that's the role of the state to do something about or not, that's your area of expertise.
right.
There's one question though I have about one of your charts, and that is the chart on Vermont prices are average and wages are low. You have a green line that represents the US average. What is the US average of?
Yeah, so we created an index for both of the wages and the prices.
Mhm.
And so the way that we put them on the chart was just to provide that 100% index. So that's the US average. And this is the percentage. When you look at Vermont, our wages are, I think it's like 86% of that US average, and our prices are
Okay.
96%. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And we will hopefully have you back at some point as we discuss S67. And Casey, you had one last thought before we turn to S70.
When we have you back, I'd like to request an analysis around Massachusetts over the last couple of years since they instituted their millionaire's tax. I mean, the data I look at is Boston Globe because they do a good job, I think, following the extreme cost of living in Massachusetts. That has become a national conversation, and the exodus of young earners from especially the Boston area. So, and frankly, in the last election, they had the second biggest swing towards Trump of any state in the country. So I think we have to take into account a lot of factors when we think about following something Massachusetts has done, which was kind of pitched to us that way a couple of years ago. And I think Massachusetts is a very concerning case study right now.
Well, I think one of the things that's incredible when we look at economic analysis is look at who's analyzing it and what's the point of view of the organization that's delivering the presentation. And as a result, it is always imperative to look at multiple sources because people can look at the same data and, as you say, reach different conclusions and indeed, in some cases, display data in a different way. And so it's useful to have balance before we make decisions.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more fully. Thank you, Julie and Steph. This was
Thank you
great
for having us.
and helps tee us up for the second half of our work this year and for the work every year. Thank you. We will look forward to more. So we're going to pivot back to S71/93. And I think we are going to have Rick come and join us. Rob very thoughtfully did an overview of the work that our Institutions and Technology Committee did. We are looking at S71 with a strike all with S93 embedded into it. So S9, so all the comments on S71 as it was, I think they're really looking at S90. And our job, yeah, great. And if you need to take a break, I know we have not really had a full break. If you need to take a break, let's just stagger it. All of us, so that we're thoughtful, have people here. Rob will remind us that the vote out of your committee on this bill was 5-0.
5-0.
Great. And Rob, you have it on the floor today, I assume.
Yes.
Great. Which is why we just are wanting to do a flyby with enough so that people have enough sense so that we can do a straw poll and at least lend our support to this.
For example, Office of Legislative Counsel. S71, you should have either on your computer or in front of you.
Has passed out.
Senate institutions. Correct. As Senator Plunkett said, it did pass out 5-0 out of that committee. And this committee debated last session, H121, the data privacy bill, which was passed out of both chambers, eventually vetoed by the governor. So this, I didn't work on H121 last year. I can't speak to everything that was in that bill compared to this one, But S71 is fairly similar to the Connecticut data privacy law that was passed several years ago, and also includes some of the amendments that Connecticut recently also passed into law, their data privacy bill. Does not include newer amendments they're proposing that have not yet passed. But it's an attempt, I think, to maintain a similar data privacy landscape in the New England area. So there's a lot of definitions, and the definitions are critical. I'm not going to read the bill. It's a 45-page bill. You would probably fall asleep after page 3. But I want to highlight a few definitions that I think are important. Starting on page 2, biometric data. That's information, usually fingerprints, retina scans, DNA. Do you have a copy?
Yeah, we're just trying to make sure we have it. It's as passed by Senate institutions, so we should be able to pull it up from
You
the
did, and I just
institution.
emailed it.
Okay.
Okay, so
We have it.
we have it. So let's
And I
follow it
posted it this morning, but.
follow it on your email. Yeah, don't, for this purpose, I would encourage us to look at it on ours.
This was sent to us by email.
I just now sent it again, but it's also on today's committee page.
Oh, right, it's on today's committee page, but we have it right here. Thank you. Okay, Rick, keep going.
Okay,
Sorry.
so no, it's okay. Page 2, biometric data. This is fairly sensitive data. This is your fingerprints, your DNA, your retina scans. This bill does not define what biometric data is, but it does say what it's not, and it's not a digital or physical photograph
Right.
and audio video recording. Most courts likely interpret it to include, like I mentioned, your face scan, eye scan. On page 3, consent, an important definition, because this bill will refer a lot of times to the consumer providing consent to have their data processed or to have their data sold. So it's important to see that consent means a clear affirmative act signifying a consumer's freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous agreement to allow the processing of personal data relating to the consumer. It may include a written statement or any other unambiguous affirmative action. Consent does not include acceptance of a general or broad terms of use or similar document that includes that contains descriptions of personal data processing along with other unrelated information. That means we want consumers to know what exactly they're agreeing to and not hidden in some kind of broader terms of use. Hovering over, muting, pausing, or closing a given piece of content or an agreement obtained through the use of dark patterns, basically tricking the consumer to agree to something they didn't know they were going to. Consumer means someone who is a resident of the state. So a Vermonter, right, has an address here. It does not include a individual acting in a commercial or employment context, or as an employee, owner, director, officer, or contractor of a company. Basically, it needs to be a person in their own personal use of whatever we're talking about, data process. Skipping ahead, you can look at consumer health data. That is any personal data that a controller uses to identify consumers' physical or mental health condition or diagnosis, including gender affirming health data and reproductive or sexual health data. Let's go to page 5, de-identify data. This is data that does not identify. That's kind of obvious, right? And cannot reasonably be used to infer information about or otherwise be linked to an identified or an identifiable individual or a device linked to an individual if the controller that possesses the data takes reasonable measures to ensure that the data cannot be associated with an individual, publicly commits to process the data only in a de-identified fashion and not attempt to re-identify the data, and contractually obligates any recipients of the data to satisfy the criteria set forth in subdivisions A and B of that subdivision. Questions so far? Keep going. Okay.
All good.
Geofencing comes up later in the bill as it pertains to consumer health data. That is just a technology that companies use to target people using advertising. When you're nearby a certain location, you may get a pop-up on your phone, ad on your phone, over on Facebook.
Didn't we pass that once?
You may have had a bill that was mentioned this. but I don't believe it actually became laws of granting data privacy.
Well, the whole bill was vetoed, so none of it.
No, this was,
Healthcare.
health and welfare specific came through there about reproductive services.
And you passed it in another bill.
I
I'll check
believe we
on
did.
that. I'll check on that.
Sure did. Spent a lot of time on it.
Was it my health, my data bill?
That doesn't.
Okay, I'll check it. Skipping, let's go to 24, nonprofit organization. Because they're mostly exempt from this bill. So nonprofits.
Page 24, section 24.
Page 6, subdivision 24.
Thank you.
Yep. Nonprofit organization means any organization that is qualified for tax exempt status under 501c3, 501c4, 501c6, or 501c12, or any corresponding Internal Revenue Code of the U.S. as may be amended. Is that a comma there?
Yes,
That is a typo.
I'm shocked.
Semicolon.
Should be a period. 25, person means an individual on their own. A person includes really anything. That's how it's defined in Vermont
Yeah.
statutes as it is.
Sadly, this is.
Top page 27, personal data,
So
page 7. What did I say? 27.
Top of page 7, you said.
Personal data means any information that is linked or reasonably linkable to an identified or identifiable individual. It does not include de-identified data or publicly available information, which will have that definition later in the bill. Let's skip down to page 8. Subdivision 33, publicly available information, which I just referenced. This is information that is lawfully made available through federal, state, or local government records or widely distributed media, or a controller has a reasonable basis to believe that the consumer has lawfully made available to the general public. So again, this information tends to be outside the scope of the bill as far as the sale and processing of this kind of data. Let's skip to 37A on page 9. The sale of personal data means the exchange of a consumer's personal data by the controller to a third party for monetary or other valuable consideration. The sale does not include the disclosure of personal data to a processor that processes the personal data on behalf of the controller. The disclosure of personal data to a third party for purposes of providing a product or service requested by the consumer. The disclosure or transfer of personal data to an affiliate of the controller. The disclosure of personal data where the consumer directs the controller to disclose the personal data or intentionally uses the controller to interact with a third party. The disclosure of personal data that the consumer either intentionally made available to the general public via a channel of mass media and did not restrict to a specific audience. Or the disclosure or transfer of personal data to a third party as an asset that is part of a merger, acquisition, etc., in which the third party assumes control of all or part of the controller's assets. Also important, sensitive data, 38 on page 10. This is data including data revealing racial or ethnic origin, religious beliefs, mental or physical health condition or diagnosis, sex life, sexual orientation, or citizenship or immigration status. It includes consumer health data, the processing of genetic or biometric data for the purposes of uniquely identifying an individual, personal data collected from a known child, data concerning an individual's status as a victim of a crime, and an individual's precise geolocation data. So, Senator Weeks, that may not be addressed in the bill that.
No, health and welfare did really, I think, very focused biometric, health related work on
And I'll double check anyway with the came out of that chamber lab here.
out of that committee and out of our I mean, I think we may have passed it in another bill aspects of this.
Okay, any questions about the definitions? Otherwise, I'm going to skip to the next section.
No, that
Applicability. Okay.
we did a lot of this work last year, so I mean, this is very familiar to most of us and very helpful.
So applicability, as you all know, it means who does this bill apply to? What does it apply to? Who does it not apply to? So very, very important.
So sorry, where are you now? Applicability, top
Yep.
page 12. Great.
Section 2416. So except as provided in subsection B, this chapter applies to a person that conducts business in the state or a person that produces products or services that are targeted to residents of the state, and that during the preceding calendar year, one, controlled or processed the personal data of not fewer than 100,000 consumers, and that excludes personal data controlled or processed solely for the purpose of completing a payment transaction, or control the process the personal data of not fewer than 25,000 consumers and derive more than 25% of the person's gross revenue from the sale of personal data. So thresholds there. There's questions about how many Vermont businesses would fall under this threshold. I can't answer that question. But this also applies to businesses outside of Vermont that process Vermonters' data. So keep that in mind as well.
In this definition, consumer is a Vermont resident, is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Subsection B, this is about consumer health data. That if that section later on, 2426, and consumer health data controllers applies to this, they don't have the same threshold basically. That if you process consumer health data or your consumer health data controller, this applies to you no matter how many consumers you process on an annual basis. Okay, 2417, the exemptions to this bill. So this is different, similar than applicability. In other words, this can apply to you. You can be a business that processes 200,000 consumers, right? So it would apply to you. But then you can be exempt if you meet one of these exemptions. One, shall not apply to any body, authority, board, bureau, commission, district, agency of the state, or any political subdivision of the state. So really no public agency, right, is going to be included in the state of privacy goal. Two, on the top of page 13, a person who has entered into a contract with an entity described in subdivision 1 of the subsection. So some kind of government contractor to process consumer health data. 3, nonprofits. I mentioned that earlier. The definition is important. An institution of higher education. Pretty broad exemption there. National Securities Association that's registered under 15 USC 78.3 O-3 of the SEC Act 1934 may be amended. Financial institution or data subject to the GLBA Act. That's your banks, so forth, exemption there.
So, and just pause for a question, because we have the chair and the reporter in the room, in addition to the drafter, a rare opportunity for us. So I'm just curious, Institute of Higher Education is exempt. That's fine for our nonprofits who hopefully have a worthy purpose. What if we had a for-profit Institute of Higher Education?
The next.
Yeah, do we have a for-profit Institute of Higher Education? I'm just curious.
Bennington College.
Are they for profit?
No, they're probably not.
No, Bennington College is a nonprofit. It would apply.
They're all nonprofits as far as I know.
Non-profit or
Because
for-profit.
for-profits could, as we have seen,
They would
go
be
in and
exempt.
out of business, could conceivably sell data. I mean,
Yes.
anyway, it's just a question.
They would be exempt under this, the for-profit.
Yes, no, I gather that. Okay, sorry.
Good question.
Why don't you keep going?
On that line of questioning though,
Oh, sorry, Thomas. I
is
didn't
it
see
fair to say these exemptions are mirroring what Connecticut did? That's where we started from.
Correct.
Oh, we're starting with that's where we're with your bill.
Subdivision 7, covered entity. You're going to see a lot of health exemptions here. And if you have questions about that, I'm probably not the best person to address those to. Jen Carby, who's not here, but I imagine she'll be brought in on the House side to explain the health exemptions. A travel nation government organization, an air carrier under 2 different definitions or regulated under the FAA Act. And subsection B, the following information, data, and activities are exempt from this chapter, protected health information under HIPAA. Patient identifying information. A lot of this is medical research that
Right.
Gene tends not to affect the the ability to conduct that research. 3, identifiable private information for purposes of the federal policy for the protection of human subjects. B, that is otherwise information collected as part of human subjects, research, et cetera, et cetera. And 4 and 5 are in that same vein.
So just, if I may, given the impending bankruptcy of 23andMe, the number 3, identifiable product information. I'm just curious how that would be impacted. I mean, not happily, it's not here, but it is concern for, I mean, it's private information with a privately owned company. How would that be impacted?
A question I can't answer at the moment, but something I can look into.
No, and I think it may be a question on the floor. Wendy?
Well,
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
so it's not protect, my understanding is the way that company gets the information is not through a doctor. So it is not protected by HIPAA.
Right.
HIPAA,
It's fine.
that's one of the challenges in this world is that folks make assumptions. And so people think that all health data is protected because of HIPAA. It's only medical institutions and medical provider, when they receive the data, that's when it's protected. So it's actually a really
at
good
the moment, it's
example.
not unprotected data as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and it's an excellent example of why we need bills like this.
Exactly. David had a question.
Yeah, if I could, so it's a good bill. The construct of the bill, the construction of the bill is a little awkward. And I'd like to ask kind of a general question. So we jump right into definitions and exemptions. So I'm not sure what we're exempting people from. Can we get just like a 10,000-foot view of what we're trying to do?
Sure.
So I understand who we're exempting from what.
So the bill in general applies to data controllers and data processors, right? So if you're a data controller, the bill eventually will kind of get to the rules you have to follow as far as consumer data. So if you're a controller that meets the threshold and you're not exempt, before you sell consumer data, before you do certain things with consumer data, you must either get their consent or allow the consumer to opt out of certain forms of processing. And so this kind of law exists already in several states. And, you know, a Vermonter who browses the internet may already see these things pop up on your screen as far as setting cookies or, you know, being able to opt out of something on a website. But again, this just ensures that companies that are complying currently for Vermonter would have to if they meet the threshold.
So then what's the logic for all the exemptions? I mean, the first comment, the basis of the bill sounds certainly reasonable. Well, so why do we have dozens of exemptions?
Well,
Why couldn't they get higher education?
so
Why would you exempt them from being able to sell that?
so
Doesn't make sense.
sometimes you have federal laws, especially with the financial institutions who already have to abide by disclosure requirements. And they have frequently come to this committee, other committees requesting exemption because they already kind of do the thing that this bill asks them to do. And they don't want 50 different state data privacy laws telling them to do 50 different things. So they prefer, you know, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which says do this,
I get that.
and they just do that. Higher education, you know, you have FERPA, and that is something that comes up in data privacy. The students' private information and their grades, like those kind of things, their attendance records may be private information. But I think that the reasons why I can't speak to, that would be something that you would have witness testimony come into and say, this is how this affects our business, this is how it affects our way of doing things.
Which is what the institutions and technology chair and reporter, do you want anything you want?
Well, actually, I think the reporter, the sponsors of 93, this is basically 93 language. But before, can I say
Yeah,
that?
just introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Wendy Harrison, Chair of Institutions. And that's a really good question, Senator Hughes, about the structure, because to me, the guts of the bill are in 2418, consumer rights.
And what page is that on?
I
Because
just
let's
have
go to the
this.
guts.
I don't have,
Oh,
Page 17.
what?
page 17.
Okay, let's go to the guts of the bill.
Because this is what we're trying to, the intent of the bill is to establish consumer rights. So confirm whether or not the controller is processing your data, correct inaccuracies in your data, delete personal data, obtain a copy of the data, opt out of the processing. So that's, to me, that's the important part of this bill, is to establish that these are rights that consumers don't currently have here. And do have in other states. Then you get to who's exempt and, you know, those, that's where it gets more interesting.
Okay, and then follow-up question. What's the time, what's the environment that this bill is living in now? Has it come out of your committee and it's come over to our committee and it's about?
It's not in our committee, it's on the floor this afternoon. And because we share consumer protection jurisdiction,
But we have consumer protection jurisdiction.
and we want very much for us to, you know, to weigh in as we go to the floor so that we can support this work. We delegated this work in large measure because we have joint jurisdiction on the technology piece, but we have the consumer protection jurisdiction. And we did not have the time for crossover to get this. We think this is an important bill to get to the House. And I think that we had to work together to make this happen. So I think we did as constructively as we could. We took a bill that has wide support, 93, and we have used it and is now the vehicle that's moving on the floor of the Senate this afternoon. And Keisha, both sponsors of 93.
To your question, Senator Weeks, I would just say I revisit what Rick started with, that this is regionally consistent. So we could go through and take testimony on each of these 9 exemptions. And I think the case would be made that there are heavily regulated already. And so there's an argument for those exemptions that have been adopted by our neighbors. I just think, to the chair's point, we delegated responsibility of work. So, I mean, if you wanted to go through and do all that testimony, we are the committee of jurisdiction. I don't feel that's necessary. I feel comfortable with this language being that it's regionally consistent.
I'm just trying to catch up.
If-
No, no, it's
Understood.
No, and I
Pages.
Yep.
Trying to figure out what that's.
no, and appreciate it. And I think that and you went some.
Yeah, so I mean, this is actually where, when we just talk about, oh, and there's this case and this headline, I was once there too. If you can time you saw something about TurboTax or 23andMe, oh my gosh,
That's
we
right.
need a data privacy bill. Certainly we should have a data privacy bill. Certainly it should be regionally compatible and compatible with the strongest laws in the rest of the country, states like California. And this is where I get concerned that we think passing a law is the end all be all of this process. The Attorney General of California, sorry if this was mentioned before I came in, the Attorney General of California issued an alert to the state of California to say people should pay attention to 23andMe's bankruptcy case. Here is information on how to delete your profile. I have a 23andMe profile. So I went to the 23andMe website, and it's very user-friendly to walk through downloading any of your data, as well as then deleting it. So what I don't want to have happen is people get worked into a frenzy that something is, you know, amiss and there's some criminal activity happening, instead of being given the information about how to use the laws that we have on our books. That is the best thing we can do for people. And I don't know if the AG's office is in here. I'd love to see our Attorney General.
She just this morning released an alert.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. That's
Right.
how this should work.
Right.
Let people know the rights and responsibilities they have, not foment fear and anxiety about who has your data and what's happening.
Great, perfect.
Yeah.
And
Okay. No, I don't think this bill does foment
No.
anxiety, and it's
It
one
doesn't.
part of.
It doesn't, but I hate when we have these
you
discussions
came in when I asked that.
absent of helping people understand how to manage their data properly. Even before this bill, we have laws on the books around data brokers.
Yep. we
And-
did.
And people have every right to call the Secretary of State's office and ask for information about how their data is being used and how to ensure that they're protected. They've had about 3 of those calls, they said, last year
And so
in the last for however long
To
they
build
remember.
To build on what you just said and to build on, and what's your name?
I'm Maggie. I'm the legislative intern.
Hi, Beck,
Oh.
from AG's office.
Yes, I don't
Good
want
have
to
you.
stress out an
So,
intern.
I think it's incumbent, once this, hopefully this bill will pass, and it's incumbent on us, I think, to market these opportunities. And I think we need to really actually spend some time and money marketing these to Vermonters so that they can protect themselves, because we can create a platform for protection, but we cannot protect everybody unless they take individual action.
Right.
So I think that is critically important to this work and is a piece of follow-up that I think we're gonna have to inevitably also work on. So I'm cognizant of our time, and I would just love to have you finish going through, but this is the guts of the bill right here, is
So-
consumer protection piece.
So I'm skipping over the rest of the exemptions.
Committee, how are you feeling? I think going to the guts and then going back if we have time. is good.
Sure.
Okay,
Can I just ask, I remember we had a lot of discussion last year about provisions, I don't know if it was in the kids code or this because they got so mixed up, but we had provisions where you would know if someone was tracking you.
Oh,
Is
right,
that-
right, I
I was
remember
looking
that.
for that and is it still in kids code?
yes, there's a signal that they covered.
Okay.
but that would be good for all
Thank you.
people, not just young, I mean, that would be
Yeah.
universally.
It would be for
Available,
minors. It would be for minors.
But it's not in this.
Okay.
It's in
Couldn't
kid
remember
code
what
as-
that
as-
thing.
as presented. All right. 2418.
Can I just ask a question in general as you go along? We've gone through definitions and now
Now we're into the guts.
into the guts of it, the issue of sensitive data. And included in sensitive data is immigration status. And this is something that we ran into earlier with another bill that we were looking at,
Our health.
regarding including that along with other kinds of things as a confidential area. And the question is, in terms of what federal government is doing right now, by including something like that in our definitions of what is sensitive to be treated in a certain fashion, and protected data or protected classes, I think is the way we have referred to it before, are we getting into an issue in which we are in conflict with federal law, putting something in our statutes?
It's a good question. Of course, the state and federal governments are exempt, right, from the bill. But you know, if a company covered by the bill were to sell the immigration status of somebody that had on file to a third party or to a data broker,
Or to the federal government?
And yes, how's that with the federal government? If the federal government requests that, what is it? How does that?
so if this law were to pass as written, they would need the consent of the consumer to sell the information. And I break the definition of consent. You know,
Yeah.
so,
Other than the fact that they have it in the first place.
right. Just in general, having that,
I think your word
This
is
is-
a red flag.
Correct.
yeah.
So I think it's a red flag.
Or
for me,
if it
not the
imposes
red.
any duties on us
Like,
If,
by
yeah,
virtue of that.
if you want to create some kind of special status for that immigration status information that is more sensitive than regular, you know, something we can consider calling a house side.
yeah, I think, well, but I think it's a good flag, as it were,
Yeah.
for the House if they consider this bill to pick up. Thanks.
2418. So this is the, I actually think 2419 is a,
Okay. let's
is the
go to
crux of it,
workouts.
but what, the reason I say that 2418 is like, the consumer should be able to do this.
Yeah.
Should be able to do that. It's a very nice, plain spoken way,
Yeah.
which is good sometimes to kind of read, this is what we want consumers to be able to do. But the actual legal stuff, what you have to do is in 2419. So if I could,
That's at the bottom of page 21,
actually, sorry, 2420. Yeah. 2420.
2420.
Yeah,
okay.
2420.
That's at the top, so that's in the middle of page
22. Yeah. Okay, so these are duties on controllers, right? So,
And maybe for somebody who hasn't gone through this before, can you just differentiate controller versus processor?
oh, this is,
Just- I know, but it's David, maybe, I mean, it might be helpful for all of us.
yeah, yeah.
Minors.
Yeah, no, and this is, it's a tough one, right? So a controller determines the means of how data is processed. And I just said a bunch of random words, right? A lot of controllers are also processors. One example I can give would be like Starbucks. You know, that would be a company that not only processes data, but also controls the means of the processing of the data. So, it's not always super clear, and the bill does define it, and you can look at the definitions of what a controller and a processor is, but in the tech world,
Here's what I found.
no Siri. I don't need that.
Siri,
She thinks I'm struggling. She thinks I'm struggling.
AI.
Is your heart rate going up?
Controller.
Yes, I guarantee you Apple spoke. So let me start with what a controller has to do. They shall limit the collection of personal data to adequate, relevant, and reasonably necessary in relation to the purpose for which the data is processed. Except as otherwise provided, shall not process personal data for purposes that are neither reasonably necessary to or compatible with the disclosed purposes for which the personal data is processed as disclosed to the consumer, unless the controller obtains the consumer's consent. Shall establish, implement, maintain reasonable administrative, technical, and physical data security practices to protect confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of personal data. So you're talking about 23andMe, right? If they're considered a controller, they would have to establish this type of thing. Four,
sound like they have.
shall not process
Delete your data.
shall not process sensitive data concerning the consumer without obtaining the consumer's consent, or in the case of processing of sensitive data concerning a known child without processing the data in accordance with COPA. So this bill, H121 last year, did lump in some minor protections. This bill does not include the kids code stuff, which is
Right.
now in a different bill in the Senate coming to the House, right? So this is kind of the extent. There's maybe a couple other minor, I thought you might think that was a pun, but minor protections are in this bill. They're not minor. Subdivisions 5 shall not process personal data in violation of the laws of the state and federal laws that prohibit unlawful discrimination against consumers. Shall provide an effective mechanism for a consumer to revoke the consumer's consent under the section that is least as easy as the mechanism by which the consumer provided the consumer's consent. And upon revocation, cease the process of data as soon as practicable, but not later than 15 days after receipt. Again, these are a bunch of shall not process the personal data of a consumer for purposes of targeted advertising or sell the consumer's personal data without the consumer's consent. That's a big one there. Under circumstances where a controller has actual knowledge, willfully disregards that the consumer is at least 13 years of age, but younger than 16 years of age. And 8 shall not discriminate against the consumer for exercising any of the rights contained in this chapter, including denying goods or services, charging different prices or rates for goods or services, or providing a different level of quality of goods or services to the consumer. That subsection shall not be construed to require a controller to provide a product or service that requires the personal data of a consumer that the controller does not collect or maintain, or prohibit a controller from offering a different price, rate, level, quality, or selection of goods or services to a consumer, including offering goods or services for no fee if the offering is in connection with some type of voluntary participation in a rewards program.
Yeah.
C, a controller shall provide consumers with a reasonably accessible, clear, and meaningful privacy notice. So this is a fairly long subsection, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just talking about what should be in that privacy notice. I'll let you read that on your own. D,
We can read it privately.
yes, there you go. D is also about the disclosure if the controller sells personal data to third parties or processes personal data for targeted ads. The controller shall clearly and conspicuously disclose the processing as well as the manner in which a consumer may exercise the right to opt out of processing. E, a controller shall establish and describe in the privacy notice one or more secure and reliable means for consumers to submit a request to exercise their consumer rights pursuant to this chapter. And again, I'll let you read what those means look like, but you see the general idea there. I'm going to skip to page 27. Subdivision B, if a consumer If their decision to opt out of any processing of the data for purposes of target ads or any sale of the personal data through an opt-out preference signal sent in accordance with the provisions just written, conflicts with the consumer's existing privacy setting or voluntary participation. So this is giving them what happens if there's like conflicting messages. This gives the controller guidance on what to do there.
And
Okay.
does it give the consumer a pop-up to clarify what they want?
The controller shall comply with the consumer's opt-out preference signal, but may notify the consumer. It's up to the controller.
What's conceived here, a pop-up, or is this embedded in the terms of service? What have you, that we always have that stuff.
The first part of your question?
Is this conceived as like a pop-up,
Yeah,
like,
because that's how we experience it now. Before you can progress, you have to make decisions.
So it depends on, if you're using a mobile app, right? It's not going to be a pop-up, it's going to be in your settings. If it's a website and you're logged in, it also could be like in your account settings, or it could be somewhere on the website if you're not logged in. So it's going to vary. And that's why it's not specific, because the ways that we
Depends on the
access,
device that
the
you're.
ways we access the data is going to vary based on our device and how we're logged in. But we can be, so, you know, we can also be specific. We can tell the controller, the house.
Yeah, we could, I think actually, all of the, we absolutely can
Yeah.
make recommendations, perhaps they consider this to pay.
Okay, 2421 on the top of page 28. These are now the duties of the processor. The previous section was duties of the controller. So a processor is an entity that processes the data in a fashion that is dictated by a controller. And again, sometimes processors are also controllers, but you do have just sometimes processors that follow the direction of a controller.
Right.
I want to start with A says a process shall adhere to the instructions of the controller and shall assist the controller in meeting the controller's obligations, because in the bill, data controllers are much more regulated than a processor. So a lot of times a controller needs a processor to comply with the requirements of this bill. So this bill says if a controller needs you processor to help them, you must help the controller get the data they need or process what they need to comply with the bill. B1, there's a requirement of a contract between a controller and a processor, which governs how the data is processed. On the top of page 29, the contract shall be binding and clearly set forth instructions for processing data, the nature and purposes of it, the type of data subject, the duration, and the rights and obligations of both parties. Subdivision 3 lays out more of the requirements of the contract. I'll let you read that on your own time. At the bottom of page 29.4, subdivision 4, a processor shall provide a report of an assessment to the controller upon request. C, the section shall not be construed to relieve a controller or processor from the liabilities imposed on the controller or processor by virtue of the controller or processor's role in the processing relationship as described in this chapter. D1 provides guidance to determine if an entity is a controller or processor. It's a fact-based determination that depends on the context in which the data is to be processed. So what we don't want is a controller, quote unquote, acting like a processor and not being regulated as the bill intends to regulate controllers. So D1, 2, 3, 4 lays out how that would be decided and determined if there's a question as to is this entity a controller or a processor. Okay, section 2422 on the top of page 31. These are the data protection assessments. A controller shall conduct and document a data protection assessment for each of the controller process activities that presents a heightened risk of harm. And now we define what that is, what a heightened risk of harm is. That would be the processing of personal data for targeted advertising, selling personal data, the processing of personal data for profiling, You kind of see the A, B, and C kind of profile that we're talking about.
Yeah.
A, B, C, and D, excuse me, for processing sensitive data. B1, these assessments shall identify and weigh the benefits that may flow directly and indirectly from the processing to the controller, the consumer, other stakeholders, and the public against the risks to the consumers. Skip down to C1, the AG may require that the controller disclose any data protection assessment that is relevant to an investigation conducted by the AG, and the controller shall make the data protection assessment available to the Attorney General. And they can use that to determine, as one tool to determine compliance with the bill. It is exempt from the Public Records Act in case there's any trade secrets or confidential information.
Right.
This allows a controller who produces this assessment for a different state that has data privacy law to use that same assessment if it indeed covers the same requirements that our bill would cover. I'm sorry, that's not D. That's later on. I got ahead of myself.
Be a single data
That is
protection of that.
E. That is E. How dare I confuse those two? Okay, and it is only required after July 1st, so the bill was not retroactive. That July 1st, 2025 would be the time the assessment shall apply. 2423, and me, I'm just kidding. De-identified data, controller's duties, exceptions, a few other things. A controller in possession of de-identified data shall take reasonable measures to ensure that the data cannot be associated with an individual. Just taking a step back, remember the definition of de-identified data. That's data that cannot be reassociated with a person.
Right.
So that or a device of a person. So that data is treated differently here. Publicly commit to maintain and using de-identified data without attempting to re-identify the data, and contractually obligate any recipients of the de-identified data to comply with the provisions of this chapter. This chapter does not require a controller processor to re-identify it. Maintain data in identifiable form, or collect, obtain, retain, or access any data or technology in order to be capable of associated and authenticated consumer requests with personal data. This chapter shall be construed to require a controller or processor to comply with an authenticated consumer rights request if the controller is not reasonably capable of associating the request with the personal data or being reasonably burdensome. 2, does not use the personal data to recognize or respond to the specific consumer who is the subject of the personal data or associate the data with other personal data of the same consumer. And does not sell the personal data to any third party or otherwise voluntarily disclose the personal data to any third party other than a processor, except as otherwise permitted in this section. 2014, just a small exception there, does not apply to pseudonymous data in cases where the controller is able to demonstrate that any information necessary to identify the consumer is kept separately. A controller that discloses pseudonymous data or de-identified data shall exercise reasonable oversight to monitor compliance with any contractual commitments to which that data is subject to. 2424, kind of a limitation section here. This chapter should not be construed to restrict a controller's, processor's, or consumer health data controller's ability to comply with various state or federal laws, comply with a subpoena in some kind of civil criminal issue, cooperate with law enforcement concerning conduct or activity that the controller, processor, or consumer health data controller reasonably and in good faith believes may violate a federal, state, or local law. Investigate, establish, or exercise, defend legal claims, provide a product or service specifically requested by a consumer, perform under a contract to which consumer is a party, including fulfilling the terms of a written warranty, take steps at the request of a consumer prior to entering into a contract, take immediate steps to protect an interest that is essential for the life or physical safety of the consumer. Prevent, detect, protect against, or respond to security incidents, identity theft, fraud, harassment, etc. Engage in public or peer-reviewed scientific or statistical research in the public interest that adhere to all their applicable ethics and privacy laws, that is approved, monitored, and governed by some type of review board that determines whether the deletion of the information is likely to provide substantial benefits that don't accrue to the controller. The benefits of the research outweigh the risks to privacy, and whether the controller or consumer health data controller has implemented reasonable safeguards to mitigate privacy risks associated with research, including any risks associated with trade identification. Assist another controller, processor, consumer health data controller, or third party with any of the obligations under this chapter, or process personal data for reasons of public interest in the area of public health, community health, or population health, but solely to the extent that the processing is subject to suitable and specific measures to safeguard the rights of the consumer, and under the responsibility of a professional subject to the confidentiality obligations under federal, state, or local law. Subsection B, the obligations imposed on these entities should not restrict these entities' ability to internally use the data to conduct internal research to develop, improve, repair products, effectuate a product recall, identify and repair technical errors, perform internal operations that are reasonably aligned with the expectations of the consumer, or reasonably anticipated based on the consumer's existing relationship with the controller, or are otherwise compatible with processing data in furtherance of the provision of a product or service that the consumer specifically requests.
So in the interest of time, should we do the next two big sections, the enforcement by the AG and the consumer health data privacy?
Sure.
Should we, we're almost there. So maybe.
So it's the consumer protection piece that you would want to look into.
Yeah.
Page 40, bottom of page 40, section 2425. This is the enforcement section of the bill. So it is exclusive to the AG in this bill. So subsection B, between July 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2026, the AG shall, before starting any kind of action for violation, civil action enforcement mechanism, issue a notice of violation to the controller or consumer health data controller if the AG determines a cure is possible. So that's kind of important there, right? That the AG is given the autonomy to determine if they believe that a cure is possible. If they don't believe that, they don't have to do this B1. But if they do believe it's possible, then they do need it to be B1. So if a controller or consumer health data controller fails to cure the violation within 60 days, the AG may bring an action pursuant to the section. Annually, that's the reports. You can read that report, what the AG must do. So subsection C, after January 1st, 2027, the cure period becomes explicitly optional, where the AG is able to consider certain things that the bill would ask them to look into. So that would be one, before they institute a action, they would look at the number of violations from that specific controller. They would look at the size and complexity of the controller or processor, the nature and extent of the controller or processor's processing activities, the likelihood of injury to the public, the safety of persons or property, whether the alleged violation was caused by human or technical error, and the sensitivity of the data. So again, these are things that you're providing the AG's office with to consider. They don't have to after 2027, January 1st.
But this is for the transition into.
The transition is
Transitional opportunity for the AG to.
well, the transition is from this July to
Right.
the end of 2026,
Right.
where they are told to give this cure period if they believe
Right.
that a cure is possible.
Right, it's a transition to do the cures and then,
Then the cure is
Right.
explicit. I use the word explicitly because that's the best word, but after January 1st, 2027 becomes clearly optional
Right.
to give a cure, 60-day cure period.
okay,
So subsection D makes it clear, explicitly clear, there's no private right of action for violations of the chapter. E, subject to an exception, I'll get to in a second, that a violation of this bill were to constitute a violation of our Vermont Consumer Protection Act, which is 2453. However, again, saying that the consumer may not take this to the court, it must be to the AG's office. F, the AG shall provide guidance to controllers and processors for compliance with terms of the bill. Any processor or controller that, in the opinion of the AG, materially complies with the guidance provided by the AG shall not constitute an unfair and setback. So again, you're giving the AG some latitude here to determine if they think that this really, they for the most part materially complied with the law, then they're given the option not to use that enforcement mechanism that we did in this bill. Does that make sense?
yes,
Question before
yeah.
I'm not, skimming the whole bill right now, but, I thought it was actually really valuable last biennium that we included the Agency of Digital Services. Are they nowhere in this bill?
They're not.
Did the committee hear from ADS?
No, what we wanted to do was take your bill as we received it. Because
Okay.
these bills are very complicated, as you know, so if we pick and choose, the whole thing could be impacted.
Yeah, so, I might get the name of it wrong, but ADS has an AI, task force, and I think they were really ready and willing to include, consumer data privacy writ large in that task force and add some more experts. They have a data privacy expert. So I would look for us to either, get possession or offer that as an amendment
We could
before
offer
this
it
bill
for tomorrow.
passes.
Yeah.
At the end of the session. I mean, honestly, I don't want.
Well, we could also take it up
Do
as a
anything.
concern and identify this as a concern with House Commerce
Well-
or an opportunity. Yeah.
So our committee will be talking with ADS, so that's
Yeah.
something that we can talk to them
Right.
about.
That'd be great. I just want to make sure it doesn't get lost.
No, it's not.
I think they're a really useful agency to
Yes.
bring into this conversation, and they've been very helpful on the AI front from what
Here,
I'm
here.
remembering about.
Right. Thank you. Rick, we've got 3 minutes.
You got 3 minutes for Sophie's and Addy talks.
Oh my God, really?
I'm joking. I'll try to get out of the chair. All right.
Oh, you're here for me.
Humor
Right.
belongs.
Okay. Okay, so let's just finish up.
Okay,
We're almost there.
right, so I finished with subsection F. Okay. Questions about the enforcement mechanism? I know that's.
A quick summary would be great.
I gave it to you.
Oh, right. I didn't.
Yeah. Okay, so section 2426, the consumer health data privacy, again, recall that the applicability is the 100,000, 25,000 does not apply to consumer health data controllers, but they do apply to the exemptions. And you'll see there's additional exemptions here to the consumer health data privacy section. So, exemptions provided in B and C later, and 2417 B and C, which if you refer back to 2417 B and C, you will see that is.
Right, no, it looks like language we just went.
It is the exemptions to, health data controls. Okay.
Right.
So 1, provide any employee or contractor with access to consumer health data unless the employee or contractor is subject to a contractual or statutory duty of confidentiality. Provide any processor with access to consumer health data unless the person and processor comply with section 2421, which is the controller's obligations. Make sure. Yes. Right.
Yeah,
No, processor obligations.
we saw this language
Yeah.
earlier.
Geofence, I mentioned that earlier. the geofence language for consumer health data only. Sell or offer to sell consumer health data without first obtaining the consumer's consent. So notwithstanding a few sections. Subsection, I always struggle with this specific subsection. Subsection A of this section and the provisions of 2415 and 20 through 2425, which is everything except this section. Consuming consumer health data and consumer health data controllers apply to persons that conduct business in the state. And so this is already kind of addressed in the applicability, but it's here again to ensure that this applies to a larger number of businesses. C, subsection A of the section shall not apply to any. And you have similar exemptions,
Yeah, which is what we've seen the language there.
right? And make sure.
Yeah.
These exist already in the 24-17, but again, double check because you want to make sure that you have the right exemptions in there that you want.
Great. And the effective date is 26, although we enable the AG to do work between now and 26 and 27. So there is there any thought of, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a good point because if it takes effect July 1st of next year,
Well, we
then
missed that transitional window.
there would be a 6-month window.
So do we want to?
That's big enough.
Well, but we're enabling them to begin that work in 25. So.
Right.
We can either let the House fix that. Let's let the House maybe fix that, but I think it should be identified as something we need to have, maybe 2 effective dates.
I would advocate that before this bill makes it to final passage at the end of session, that our committee has possession for issues like these. It's consumer.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Rick. Much appreciated. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody who's had input and help on this. And this is up on the floor today, Rob, and good luck. And no, it's exciting. I'm glad we're here. I would entertain a motion maybe from one of the sponsors of 93 to.
Would move that just in support of the S71 as amended by our IT institutions.
And all those in favor?
Good.
Yeah, David,
Sir.
question.
Comment.
Yeah.
Question. So my understanding of this process is we received this bill in preparation for the floor session. Because we have jurisdiction over elements of the bill, I frankly I like the bill overall, and I was intending to vote for it. But as a committee who's supposed to receive a bill and deep dive it for a relevant topic area, I don't think we've done that due diligence. So I'm going to vote no, but I'm going to support the bill on the floor, maybe ask a couple of questions, but I think that we're kind of usurped the committee function, and that's just my, kind of pseudo freshman perspective.
No, I think I appreciate it. And I think that this is one of the challenges when our pro tem asked yesterday in our chairs meeting, what would you do differently about crossover? I said the Senate should have an extra week because in all fairness, we only have half the time the House has. And we have not had enough time.
Not to mention, we got our bills 2 weeks later.
Not to mention that.
I mean, no offense to Litch Council, but that was, I think, everybody's universal agreement in the Senate.
Exactly. So I take your point. I appreciate it. I would only do this at the beginning of a biennium where we have ample time for us to have possession of it after it goes through the House. I hear you loud and clear, and I would hope that that's why we got smart about it and delegated the work to the committee that has also jurisdiction on it. So I am thrilled they were able to make the time to do this work, and I'm glad that it's moving. And the next step is the House, and then we will have possession of it. But I take your.
Can we really confer, because we were supposed to get possession of it, and I understand crossover stuff. But can we confirm on the record that we will have possession of this bill before?
I can't confirm anything without talking to Bloomer and the pro tem.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's a conversation, but I think we would hope to.
Did you advocate?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So-
I'm uncomfortable in voting on something that I don't have the input that I think we should have had with the bill.
I appreciate
In
that.
particular, I'm just thinking like the geofencing issue, which I know we looked at.
We did. We looked. And the three of us have benefit of really working on
Yeah.
this closely.
Yeah.
last year. So I
I
feel
don't know if it's a better.
Suffered through this twice.
So bad.
But my point is, I have real concerns as to whether the businesses that are located in areas covered by this have the ability to even respond to it, have the ability to do it, what costs us. I mean, there are lots of questions that are remaining. We haven't had a chance to ask. And I'm very reluctant to vote on things that I see are issues that are significant. We haven't had a chance to look at or ask or deal with.
I appreciate that. And I think I would be happy, Mark, I was gonna be here.
I'm being, no, it's not that I'm opposed to the privacy vote. You know, I was
You were very
very much
supportive.
in favor of it last year and so on, as far as it went, but the same issue then is.
You will
the
have-
issue now.
Right, do you want me to?
Yes.
Respond just really quickly? So this bill is more generous to businesses than last year's. bill
Yes, I agree.
was. And it was developed by businesses, and we did hear from, Chamber and several business organizations that they preferred this bill and supported this bill.
I think the valid concern is about a committee of conference at the end. We just want to make sure this committee still has relevance in that composition of any.
Yes, and we have had confirmation from the pro tem that if there is a conference committee, that we will have a member on it.
But even like, we've identified issues here that
Yeah.
I think are really important to the final bill that the Senate votes on. So I think it would be actually a problem if we worked our way under the conference committee without having had possession of the bill, so we can make important changes with whatever comes back, you know.
And of course, there's always the issue, there's no guarantee that anything will come back from that. What if the House approves this amendment? You know,
Well, then we won't be doing a final vote on it. So thank you both. I appreciate your, and disappointed because you've done a lot of work on this, but I understand that we're 3-2 in support of this work.